Hi folks, in this video series we're going to take this unused wall and we're going to turn it into this. This is a three-part series. In part one we're going to go out and find some old pallet wood. We're going to bring it back, we're going to mill it up, and we're going to turn it into shiplap, and then we're going to cover the wall with that. In part two we're going to create our own French cleat system and get that installed. And then in part three we're going to make the holders that are going to go on here to hold the actual clamps. So stick around for this journey and let's learn together. This is part one of my three-part series of taking unused wall space and turning it into my ideal clamp storage solution. I'm going to be able to take clamps that were scattered all around, in some cases in boxes, some cases buried by things, and I'll be able to put them all in one place close to my assembly table so that I can get to them, as long as I put everything back where it goes. And in this part of the video series, we're going to go out and find some old pallets. We're going to break them down, bring them back, mill them up. We're going to turn them into shiplap. Let's get started.
So the first thing I had to do was find some place that had some pallet wood. I found this place that had some wood that said it was FRE. I believe that's free, but you may want to check with the owners before you go taking people's wood. In this case, it was free. Once I verified that I wouldn't get arrested for petty larceny or trespassing, I started breaking down the pallets they had available. I used this little crowbar-y thing, and it worked really, really well. And now it's time for a public service announcement. If you'll look at this marking, you'll see that it has HT on it, and that's indicating that it is heat treated. And we want to look for that. We do not want to see MB, because that is methyl bromide, and it's a toxic pesticide. It's illegal in many areas, but you don't want to use that type of wood. If you're not familiar with the markings, look them up and make sure your wood's safe to use. Thanks. And with the truck loaded up, I headed back to the shop.
Well, I've moved some things around, and I think I have enough space to get started with our clamp rack, or at least finishing off the wall that will be the clamp rack. And that's this area here. Now, the problem is I wasn't thinking ahead when I installed the garage doors. And this piece right here that the garage door is mounted to comes over this stud. So I have nothing on this edge to nail what will be my boards going up the wall to. So I'm going to cut a couple little strips, tack them in here, and just give something to nail to.
So I jumped on the table saw and ripped down a couple strips to use for that. I took those strips and nailed them to the studs so that I would have something to nail the shiplap into. That went fairly quick.
I'm going to go ahead and take some measurements, figure out what insulation I need to cut, and then I'll get that on the workbench and we'll get the pieces cut ahead of time.
I go ahead and measure for each one of the bays, and I like to add several inches to each one so that I can take the vapor barrier and make sure I have something to staple it to on the fire brace there or at the bottom or the top.
All right, we got insulation. This is an R19 for 2x6 walls, which is what I have. It's what I've used in the rest of the shop. I'll go ahead and put on my mask and goggles, and it is insulation. And I don't want to be getting in my eyes or getting in my skin. It gets really itchy when we do that.
I went ahead and cut open this roll of insulation so I could spread it out and then cut out the pieces that I need. Somewhere in here, I decided I wanted a cinnamon roll, but I'm not 100% sure why. Anyway, I rolled this insulation out and measure out what I need and cut it off. And then I go ahead and mark it. I labeled the bins 1, 2, 3, and 4 so that I could keep track of which piece goes where. Do this 3 times. Of course, I'm working like a madman to get this done. Now seems like a really good time to take care of some housekeeping. I can really use your help. If you don't mind, I would appreciate you putting in the comments what you like or don't like about the videos that I'm making. That will help me continuously improve and produce content that'll keep you coming back. And of course, constructive comments will help us all. And that's what this channel is really about, trying to learn as we go. And of course, liking and subscribing to the channel really helps me out. And I really appreciate that if you'd consider doing so. All right, let's get back to work.
Well, I've got my major pieces cut and labeled, so I'm going to go ahead and start installing them into this wall. One of the things I like to do is before I actually install it, because I cut it a few inches too long, I like to separate the top and the bottom. That gives me a little bit of lift so that I can overlap and go onto these cross braces or into the floor or the ceiling, wherever I need to make sure that I go ahead and have paper covering this and sealing the insulation in. That's part of your vapor barrier, so you want to try to have that. You don't want any big gaping holes with your insulation. Let's go ahead and get started on that. I will go ahead and mask up and get some goggles on because insulation can be nasty.
Now it's just a matter of taking my trusty battery operated stapler and going through and attaching those insulation pieces. As you can see, I'm taking that extra and overlapping that fire brace there, that cross brace. And then I'm also stapling it into the bottom to make sure we have good coverage with this. I sometimes wish that life had a speed up button like you see here, because this makes it go really, really fast. But it wasn't too bad. I went through and I cut out for the electrical outlets, little boxes that you see there. Make sure I try to get a tight fit as I go. I want to seal that up as good as I can as I work my way through this. First I jump up, get the high bays there. Just go around and overlap as best I can and staple it up. Just doing a final inspection. Everything seems good. I'm happy with it. Now, I will mention that it gets hot.
Heats up quick. I brought in my pallet wood and stacked it up here. These things have a lot of staples in them. They wanted to make sure these weren't going to pull loose. I could just cut the ends off these and save myself a lot of time, basically cut my work in half, because then I don't have to remove the middle 2 rows of staples. But based on the width of the area that I want to cover, if I can get these staples out, I can cut this board basically in half and get enough to get 2 per board to put up there. If I have to chop the ends off, I'm not going to quite make it, and I'll have to patch it together, which, you know, it's a pallet board wall, so it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if that's what we end up doing. But I'm going to go ahead and see how easily we can get these out, or how difficult it is to get these out. I'm going to try a couple methods here. One of these is I have the nail remover gun, and this thing works great on nails. I suspect it's not going to work so well with these staples. I suspect what's going to happen is I'm going to try to remove them, and because they're skinnier than a nail, they're not as strong as a nail, they're probably going to bend up inside there, or maybe even get caught inside the remover. So I'm a little worried about that. But we'll give it a try and see how it goes. The other thing is, I went ahead and got a pair of, I used to call them staple pullers. This is actually a channel lock fence tool, 10-inch. They were about $4 more than another popular brand name, not made in the USA though. And I figured, well, I'll pay the extra $4 for the channel locks. I try to do that here and there where I can, where it makes sense, for a good quality pair of tools made in the USA if possible. Obviously, I've got a lot of Harbor Freight and things around, so it's not exclusive. I'd like to say everything I had was American made. We do what we can where we can, and it makes sense. If you've worked on the farm or had a lot of land and you worked with your old post and fence, sometimes your barbed wire or your farm fence, these are specially designed to do a lot of that work. They have built-in wire cutters, places where you can actually start the nail, where you can put them in and hit them on the side. Bit of a hammer here to pound them in. This to get underneath them to pull them out. And then of course this curved head up here, which allows you to get started with it and rotate it over. So it's a very useful tool for that type of work. And I'm hoping it's going to help me with these pallet boards, pull these staples out. Now, based on previous experience with this particular tool, this will shoot nails and they'll hit with quite a bit of impact when it ejects them. I don't think that's going to be the case here with the staples, just based on how I probably won't get both sides of the staple at the same time, so it'll behave a little bit differently. However, pieces of metal can go flying, so I'm going to wear a little extra eye protection with that. I have polycarbonate lenses and I use for basic woodworking, but if things are going to start flying and maybe come in from the sides, I'll go ahead and use a little extra protection. Normally, I would use a deeper container than this to shoot the nails into. With the nails They go down, hit, and then they won't bounce back up. I feel like with these staples, they're probably not going to eject them all the way out, and I'm not going to have to worry about that here. We're going to find out here shortly. If that is a problem, I'll probably have to get a trash can. I just basically use this so I could sit it on the table and I could catch them on film a little bit better to see what's really going on here. Well, first I'm going to try it by just getting one side of the staple. Wow, that actually worked fairly well. If you can see that. Definitely enough to get a hold of to pull it out. That one actually ejected the whole staple. This may go a lot better than I suspected it would. Mostly out. That one actually broke it and took half of it out. Okay, one it actually took all the way out. The others it took mostly out. I think it's just going to be a matter of grabbing hold of these. I don't know if that's going to be the best tool for this now looking at it, but pulled it right out. I actually feel like I can get a rhythm with this, and this is going to go quite well. Better than I thought it was going to go. So I was going along just fine, and then this happened. Yep, staple got stuck next to the plunger. I've actually taken this piece off. Unfortunately, it's not split in any way. And so the plunger's stuck in there, and even with taking this off, I have not been able to extract the staple from between this piece of metal and the plunger. So I'm going to set that to the side now, and I started doing some of these by hand. It's definitely going to slow the work down a lot.
Now, I'm not going to bore you by showing you all of these. I'm just going to show you one of the boards I worked on and how I went about it manually. It did take a while, but it wasn't the worst thing I've ever had to do. Basically took a hammer and a pair of pliers to kind of straighten up the staples and then pound them out. And then I used several of the other pliers to try to pull them out, and I experimented with different ones to see which one worked best. The one you see there with the rounded head seemed to work fairly well. And once I got them all done, I stacked them up and was ready to go to the next step. And that next step is rough cutting these down to length. And our job here is to take the big stack that you're going to see on the left and get those cut and transfer them over to the right. And in the end, it looks like we accomplished that.
Using this pallet wood here on this wall is kind of a prototype for me. I'm seeing if it's worth the effort and the outcome of what we get. I'm hoping by the time we mill it up, it's going to be good enough to use. I noticed the wood's a little bit dry. It's probably going to splinter some on us, but we'll go ahead and run it through and see how it turns out and see if we can get something usable out of this. It is for inside of a shop, so it should be good enough.
So I hopped on over to the jointer and started running the first of many boards. And when I do this, I'm not putting a great deal of pressure down. You see those dark areas on that board right there? I'm not trying to take that off in one pass. The purpose here is to get this smooth and flat. And if I put down a bunch of pressure, I could possibly get it smooth, but it may not be flat. So for example, if there's a bow in it and I just push it down, well, that bow's going to come back up when I let the pressure off. And that's not the purpose of this. I need smooth and flat. That will allow me to run it through the planer on the next stage, and then I'll have two coplanar surfaces. And I just thought I'd mention I apologize that I'm a little nasally. I picked up a cold somewhere along the way. I'm going to keep running this board through until it's nice and smooth and flat. That could take several runs through. And if you look at the ends here, you'll notice one side is much thicker than the other. That's part of the cost of doing business. I don't know what the lowest common denominator of these boards is going to be until I really get them milled up, or at least close to the finished product. Then I'll have to determine what's the skinniest board, mill them all up to that thickness, and then I'll have to do the same thing for the height of the board. Now you'll notice I've turned the board on its side and I'm running it through. that nice and flat surface is going against the guard that you see there. And my goal is to make sure I have two sides that are at a 90-degree angle to each other. Those are my two reference points, and that's a very important step in this process for the rest of it to work out correctly so that you end up with a nice and flat and squared board. I'm going to speed up the process now and get through the rest of these.
I've heard the phrase, I'd rather be lucky than good before. I don't think I agree with that statement, but in this case, I got lucky. When I was milling up this board, it had caught on a knot or something, I believe, and prevented me from smoothly sliding it through. So I flipped it over to take a look to see what was going on and found this knot. But in doing so, I looked down and I saw a little piece of metal that had been exposed, something I had not noticed. It would be difficult probably to see if there was wood on top of this still. Just as these staple holes were there, you see them, but you know the staplers are gone because I pulled them. However, in this case, if I take where this staple is and I flip it, there's no corresponding hole, exit hole. So I have a piece of a staple left in there. Now, this is one thing that you should always do before milling up wood that's not new, especially, is to check for metal. I did not do that initially. I pulled the staples, I looked at it, each board, and I felt I did a really good job on that. Obviously not good enough. So as a safety precaution, make sure you check for metal. I have this handheld metal detector, which was in my possession at the time I did this, so I should have used it, but I did not. Now, some of the wood was removed because I got down this level. Fortunately, though, it looks like my blades did not hit this. It had gotten down just to the point where they were ready to hit it. So again, extremely lucky. Not good. Well, it was good that I was lucky, but not that I was good. So I think I caught it just in time because of that little holdup that it had. So that is a good thing. So I'm going to test the metal detector and see if I can find it. I know it's there, but I just want to check and see how this behaves. So I'm going to turn this on. And right there is the staple. And if I go over the rest of the board, I can reproduce that result. Now I'm going to try it from the other side to see if it'll pick it up because it's obviously not as exposed on this side. So I don't know how sensitive this thing is. Okay, I'm not picking it up there, but it does find it there. So if it's deeply embedded, this particular unit looks like it's probably not going to find it. So I'm curious when I pull this to see how deep it really is. It may just be a crumpled up staple, so it did not get very far. And this wood here, at this point, is about 11/16. So we'll see how deep that is. Now, there is one thing to note. I tried doing this on my assembly table. If you look underneath my assembly table, it's 2 sheets of MDF that I glued together, and I put a grid line going 2 different directions, and I put a series of screws to pull that MDF together. So there are screws throughout this table. So I cannot use this metal detector on this table because I hit all the different screws. So obviously keeping it up on here, that does it. But let's see how deep that staple is to understand how this Wizard 5 can detect or not detect. So somehow, this is a very small piece, and it just happened to be on the surface. Okay, so it was just basically embedded right there. It got pushed into the wood. So not very deep at all.
So I took my scanner and I went ahead and went over each one of the boards, checking both sides as I went. Fortunately, I did not find any more metal as I went through this process. I took those boards and ran them over to the joiner and finished that process. Then I came over here to the planer and I'm running those through. You can see there's little patches of wood coming off, but not all of it yet. That's because I got to ease my way down to find what that lowest common denominator is for these boards. It's reclaimed pallet wood, so I have no guarantee of the thickness. Hopefully I'll be able to get it thick enough so that I can use it on the wall. I'm hoping at least 3/8 of an inch. And if you take a look here, that little sign, definitely a misnomer. Don't go by that. And once I finished, I found that I did have about 3/8 of an inch, which I think is going to work.
We're ready now to go ahead and rip these down to the final dimension. So based on the average size of these boards and the smallest one that I want to work with, the most I can get out of these is 3 1/8. If I go any more than that, I'm going to lose a lot of the material because they're not all wide enough. So I'm going to go ahead and set up and rip these down.
So, like many projects that involve a large amount of wood, this process becomes repetitive. The good thing is, once you get everything set up, usually you can run through the steps fairly easily. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm turning a big stack into a little stack.
I'm on the final stage of milling these boards up. And what we're going to do is put a small rabbet. It'll be on one side on the top and the opposite side on the bottom. And that will allow us to stack these boards up and have that little bit of overhang on them. I'm going to be using my router table. I'll be using this white side router bit set that I have. It has a variety of sizes available in it, and I'm going to be using the 3/16. I don't need much of an overlap on this, and I don't want to lose a lot of height of the board. They're already fairly skinny, so I don't want to lose a whole lot there. I'll also be using my setup block to get the height that I need. Basically, we want to go perhaps just a little higher than over half of this board, and as we know, this board's not very thick at just a hair over 3/8, so we don't want to go too far through it. We want to have a little bit of wood sticking over the edge. So let's get started with that process.
I find that these little setup blocks are really great for doing work like this. I want to make sure I get that bit adjusted correctly, and that setup block does a good job for that. I'm taking that square and I'm just making sure that my fence is aligned with the bit. This helps with that. You want it to be able to slide smoothly over there. And I had a few boards that did not mill up well, so I decided to use them to do some test cuts just to make sure everything was dialed in the way I wanted it. And everything seemed to work fairly well. Then I started with the big stack, turning it into a small stack again, or at least shifting stacks. Basically run this through, flip the board over, get the other side, till I get done. You'll notice there was a little knot there, and that white side bit went right through that. Did a great job on those. And what you see here is I decided to install the feather board, and that would allow me to apply consistent pressure as I ran the boards through. And my fingers are old, and putting a lot of pressure on that consistently and pushing every one of those boards through ended up taking its toll. Once I installed the feather board, it was nice and easy.
We've got all our pieces cut to basic length. I may have to trim a few to fit just perfectly, and I know I'll have to cut some pieces off to work around electrical outlets and such. But these are milled up and pretty much ready to go. So we're going to start attaching these to the wall. I have an 18 gauge brad nailer, and that's what I'm going to use. Also, this wall that I've gone to so much work in milling this up and getting it ready is going to end up being a French cleat wall, which means a great majority of it's going to be covered up with French cleats anyway. The reason I did this is I wanted to practice the concept of using pallet wood for my wall boards. This small area here is basically a prototype for me, so I can see how it goes. I learned a few things. I do think I will use the larger pieces of pallet wood. The only reason I went with this, which had a ton of staples in it instead of nails, was it was the right length for me to get the board all the way across this little section, and I didn't want to have to piece it unless I really needed to. But lesson learned, I will get the wider boards, the taller boards, if you will, so that I can mill those up and use them as regular wall boards if I proceed with this in the future. But for now, let's go ahead and get these put in and see what it looks like. I've decided I'm going to go ahead and start near the switches that we have here. I'm going to have to do some scribing, and I'm going to have to do some small pieces to work around it. So I'm just going to start here, establish my horizontal. I can then easily add up and add below with the way these are. These aren't true tongue and groove, obviously. They have the rabbet on opposing sides, so it's fairly easy to stick in either from the top or to come in from the bottom and slide them in. So let's get started with that process. I'm using 1 1/4 brads here. I'm going to get this where I think I want it there. And I'm going to make sure our first one is nice and level. And you'll notice I am just face bratting these, or face nailing these. So now that I have a good reference point here, I can start building up and down. I will, of course, check for level every once in a while to make sure everything's staying appropriate and make some micro adjustments if I need to. But we're ready to cut some pieces and get started here. Actually, I think just for a sense of accomplishment, I may go up first because they're going to be full pieces all the way up. And then I'll come back down and work on a little bit harder stuff later. So let's get started with that. Now, with these rabbited the way they are, I have the choice of which side I choose to put out. So I'm just going to pick what I think looks the best and put it that way.
Upon reflection, I probably should have picked a board that did not have a knot in almost the same spot as the board below it, but this will work.
Okay, I realized a couple things as I started doing this. I had, in my mind at least, intended to put just a very small gap here to count for a little bit of wood movement. Plus, I thought it would look nice. Again, a lot of this is going to be covered up with French cleats eventually, but I thought it would look good. I neglected to do that on the first rung here. So I can go back and trim that out a little bit if I want to clean that up. But on the next one, I've just got some little pieces of cardboard I'm going to use here. Plain cards would have worked also. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to attach these with the brad at a slight angle. They're driving in really nice, so that shouldn't be an issue.
Now, in the interest of full transparency, just let you know, I don't actually work this fast. I'm using the magic of editing to cut some things out, but show you the progress as we go up the wall. As you can imagine, it's a pretty repetitive process, kind of like we've discussed so far. Whenever we're working with large batches of wood like this, there's going to be a lot of repetition. And now we just need to step back and enjoy what we've done. Oh, I missed a piece. All right, there we go.
I think I'm going to hate to cover this up with plywood to make the French cleats, but that was the plan.
Now it's time to do a bit of scribe work. So I just need to go through and make some marks where I need to cut. Now we talked earlier about being good versus being lucky. This was lucky. See what I just did there? I did that all wrong. I didn't support both ends of the board. I didn't go smoothly with the jigsaw. I took it too fast and it just broke the piece off. Fortunately, it broke off really close to where I needed it. So all I had to do was go in and trim that up. But that's an example of getting a hurry and doing something you know you really shouldn't do. But again, I got lucky, so I'll take it. Now we're going to go ahead and really kick this in overdrive here. So I'm going to speed through this part pretty quick. But you see I scribed some more boards. I did those a little bit better and get these installed. And I just worked my way down the wall. Of course, it goes fairly quick. Now I stop to do a little cleanup. And the reason for that is I want to do some markings on the bottom. I'm going to mark where the studs are so that I can align my screws when I go to put my French cleats on. Next, I just add a piece of trim to clean it up a little bit.
Yeah, we're going to repeat the process on the other side.
Let's take a moment to see where we started from. This was the raw wall that we started with. You can see there's not much going on here. We went and added the insulation, went and got some wood, milled it up, turned it into shiplap and got all that installed. And we have a pretty decent looking wall now. That's not bad for stage one.
Hi, folks. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of my 3-part series. Once I get part 2 and 3 posted, I'll update with the links here so that there'll be title cards for it. But if you want to get ahead of the game, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and hit that alert button so that you'll get notified when part 2 and 3 come out. Thanks for watching.